Well, fantastic. Today on That's Classic, we have kind of an interesting angle. I have a gentleman on here that has just come out, or well, I should say, is about to come out with a brand new book. He was the executive producer on Married with Children. He has a new book coming out. It's called Married with Children versus the World: The Inside Story of the Shock-Com that launched Fox and changed TV forever. So I'd like to welcome Richard Gurman. Hi, Richard.
Hi, nice to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. I got to tell you, I read the book. Fascinating, really. I found it very interesting. Just so many angles. I mean, I happen to have enjoyed the show myself, but
Uh,
um, one of the things that I was curious about, I mean, there's many, but can you tell me or embellish at all on how Ed O'Neill was not the choice by the network and how, what you have heard of that initial audition?
okay, well, Ed O'Neill, when we first got the commitment for the show, one of the things that Fox did in order to entice people to to work on their new network was to offer, instead of the traditional, you shoot a pilot and then you're in a big crapshoot with everybody else as to whether you get on the air. They offered 13 episodes on the air, guaranteed, to entice big writers like Leavitt and Moye, who wrote the pilot. And so when we got down to casting, it was very difficult to find someone who could play Ed O'Neill, because it's a edgy character and he's still got to be likable. So we found the person that we liked, Ed O'Neill. I think I said cast Ed O'Neill. I meant cast Al Bundy.
Of course, I got you. I think we get it.
Anyway, so you take, for those who aren't familiar with the process, you take all your choices, you take them into one big meeting room at the network, in this case Fox, and they read the bits, they read the parts, and then the network makes the decision. Well, when Katy was approved, and the kids, we had different kids, but that's a separate story.
Yeah.
But Amanda was approved, David Garrison was approved, and when it came to Ed, there was some dissension. The casting people that were hired by Fox to help make the choices really liked him in our network, and we obviously liked him. But Barry Diller, who was this very big, powerful guy who was brought in to run the network, he didn't like him, and he left the room, and he said, "I don't particularly think he's right, but you guys do what you want." So he left the room, and then everybody said, "Well, we want Ed O'Neill." So Ed O'Neill was chosen. And then Barry Diller got back to his office, and he called up one of the people who was in the room, Garth Enseer, and he said, "What did you decide? What did you do?" And he said, "Well, we decided on Ed O'Neill." And Barry Diller says, "Well, I don't like him." And he said, "Well, you said to do what you want." And Barry Diller said, "Well, I didn't mean it." And so Barry was very much against Ed O'Neill, so much so that he called up the studio, and instead of giving the 13 on the air, which was guaranteed, which I spoke of, he
Yeah.
changed it to a pilot with an option for 12, meaning we had to shoot the pilot and prove that Ed O'Neill was the guy to play Al Bundy, or else we wouldn't even be on the air. So that's how that came down. And looking back on history, obviously Ed O'Neill proved himself to Barry Diller, and he became Al Bundy, a legend. But it all was in the hands of Barry Diller for quite some time.
Wow. And I believe in the book you said too that when Al, now I'm saying it. Now, when Ed O'Neill came into the audition, he actually had been at the gym apparently, and he had
Well,
like all his.
that was his first audition in front of the executive producers. He'd been at the gym in Hollywood, and he was reluctant to even come. His agent said, "This is kind of this crappy show. We don't even know, whether this network is going to go." And Ed said, "Well, okay, I'll take a look at the script." And he looked at the script, and he was actually playing handball at the Hollywood Y, and he came over to do the audition in his clothes that he hadn't changed or showered, and he had his bag, and he had a gym bag, and he had his handball gloves. But he made such an impression on the executive producers that they said, "Screw it, this is our guy." So that was another sort of happenstance, you know.
Yeah, there's so many wild ones in this one. You know,
Yeah.
another one that got to me too is David Faustino. He was it sounded to me from reading your book that he was originally like he came in and he didn't make the cut and you just looked over and that was
Yeah.
it. Yeah, is that true? Did he just
Yeah, it's true. Faustino came in and he didn't make the cut. Christina was approached, but I don't even think she came in.
yeah.
So the two people that were hired were good actors, Tina Casper and Hunter Carson. Hunter Carson's Karen Black's son. They
Hmm.
shot the pilot. Then after the pilot was put together, we loved all the performances, but the nature of this show, the edginess of it, required that you didn't feel sorry for the kids. If you felt sorry for the kids, you wouldn't laugh. You wanted kids, just the same thing with Katy, with the wife. I mean, it's such an edgy show that the kids were just kind of weak, and they didn't add to the sort of this tussled, harried family. So we recast, and we got Christina, who didn't want to come in,
Huh.
and we showed her the pilot that we shot, and she loved it, and she came in, and David came in, and both of them made just huge. This second time, they made huge impressions on us, and we hired them, and we reshot their parts in the pilot. So if that hadn't have happened, the career of Christina Applegate and David Faustino, we may not have been the legends that they are today. So
That
that's, yeah.
that is wild. And I know I love the fact that Christina Applegate, you had to take it to the point you had to actually show her the pilot to
Yeah,
like get her to
yeah,
move forward. I mean, that's
yeah,
just
yeah.
crazy.
And she wasn't all that confident about her comedy skills. She had been in dramas, and she wasn't positive about her own comedy skills. And she came in, and her mother said to us, we'll walk her through the comedy, make sure. But as we all know, she was brilliant, and there was no looking back once those two. And the scenes were easy to cut into the pilot. They were sort of isolated, so that made it easier for us to shoot the kids, put it back in the pilot, send it to Fox for their approval, and the rest is history.
Wow, that's wild. You know, it's funny as you're talking and as I was reading the book, the only one that seemed to me that came through the quote unquote natural audition process and seemed to work was Katy. I mean, that seemed to be like the one that Katy Sagal, she was
Yeah,
that.
but even there's a story with that too. I mean, Katy came in and auditioned, and there were other people that I auditioned to. But Katy took it upon herself. The original part was sort of a couch potato, happy to be sitting there watching TV, just kind of a quiet, restless mom. And she took it upon herself to, like what she says, like doll her up. Like she pulled her hair back and she put on these capri, for the audition, to
Wow.
even before we shot, and she did this kind of like sexy walk and everything, and we incorporated that into her character, and a lot of what she brought to it became a big part of the series. Yeah, so I mean, you're right, she had some competition, but she was head and shoulders above it. And David Garrison had been in a previous series that Leavitt and Moye had done, called It's Your Move.
Hmm.
So he was brought in. They knew what he could do. And Amanda Bearse hadn't done a lot of comedy. She was in a movie called Fright Night, in a sort of a low budget horror film, and that's where we
Totally. Yeah, I know it.
were. Yeah. So that's how the cast came together.
That's so interesting. And in Katy Sagal, of course, she was a backup singer for Bette Midler as well. So
Yeah.
that kind of I get a little of that even in the character, to be honest with you.
Yeah, she is kind of a rock and roller, definitely. And then she continued, she had a band, and she still plays, and she recorded, and yeah, she's definitely a rock and roller. And every once in a while we'd do a headpiece to a scene where there was a rock and roll song going in the background, and she'd be rocking out and so on. And she fit like perfectly into that. Yeah,
Oh
definitely.
yeah. Yeah, I could see. Are you, by the way, I mean, I got a ton of other questions for you, but are you still close with the cast?
I am close enough that I was able to call them and interview most of them, and we're all going to get together. We're going to have a reunion. It was a very close cast, but it's been like 37 years. You know, it was a very close.
Yeah.
Um, but I wouldn't say I socialize with anyone, but certainly close enough to have called them and gotten almost all of their cooperation in this book.
Yeah, and
So,
pick up a phone. Yeah, I get you.
yeah,
And then we've got the producers Ron Leavitt and Michael Moye.
right.
So they were now their background from the book. It says the Jeffersons and Silver Spoons, which not that they didn't have edge. I mean, the Jeffersons definitely, but this is on a whole nother level. Where did that come from?
Well, the as I explain in the book, you know, it's interesting that people don't people in today's media world, you can see whatever you want whenever you want it, you know, with
Yeah.
streaming and VCR and everything. At the time, it was a three network system. It's ABC, CBS, and NBC. And if you wanted to have your show stand out, you had to compete at the very time slot. If you were up against Murder, She Wrote, or whatever it was, you know, you had to do something different. So when Fox decided to become a network, they wanted to find people like Leavitt and Moye, to bring back to your question, who could write something different. And even though they had done all these classic shows, Jefferson and Silver Spoons and so on and so forth, Garth Sear, who was an important executive at Fox and who knew them from NBC, knew that they had a rebellious side. That these guys were, you know, they loved pro wrestling. They sat around and watched Divorce Court. They just had this, you know, almost all the characters have wrestling names. Bundy was King Kong Bundy. Anyway, so they came to them and they said, the other thing that your audience needs to know is that at the time, Fox had to incentivize writers to go write for them, because you could make all these writers like Leavitt and Moye, who were very top writers in their field, could make tons of money at ABC, CBS, and NBC. And Fox was promising very little because they didn't have much coverage. No one knew if they would even exist as a network past the first year. So they came to Leavitt and Moye and they said, we'll give you carte blanche, you know, do something different, do something that you really want to do. And they just had such a strong feeling about the family shows where everything gets tied up in a ribbon at the end of the series, and everybody hugs and avows their love for each other. They want to do something completely different from that. And if you know them as I do, you would know that's closer to who they are. It was more of a stretch for them to do stuff like the Jeffersons and Silver Spoons than this. But it's your job when you're a TV producer. You got to do it. So it seemed in retrospect, it was natural to go to these guys to do this edgy show. Yeah.
Yeah, I got you. And I have to admit, in the way that they are described in the book, for lack of a better term, I felt like their office felt like something out of Animal House. I mean,
Absolutely like Animal House. And back then you could smoke and people were smoking. There were filled ashtrays. There were like basketball hoop, you know, like Nerf balls and Nerf bats and blow up machines and, you know, like remote control cars. It was like walking into well, Animal House, like a fraternity house. And that's where we did our work. We would come in every day and you know, it's humorous work. It's a lot of fun. You're throwing around jokes and you're making fun of people, particularly in Married with Children. But you come in and you have to get your work done because you're on a schedule. Like you're on a schedule. You got to get your show done.
sure.
And yet, but you would just come in and it was like this playland, and there was pizza boxes, and you know, it was and yet it's this corporate multi-million-dollar endeavor, you know, but it's like kids playing in a play box within that. So yeah, that's true.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. What,
Yeah.
by the way, I've asked this of everybody that I have on my show in general. In your case, what were some of your favorite episodes? I mean, you were there for the whole run.
I love the pilot. Some of the more favorite ones that I wrote or co-wrote was when Santa came plunging to his death in the backyard of the of the Bundy house. That was really outrageous. I like a lot of people thought it was too broad, but I like when the Martians, when Al had this hit his head and had this fantasy that Martians were coming for his socks. I like the what else did I like? I like the one on the when they flew first class in the airplane. I like the wrestling ones. I mean, there's just so many. Yeah. What about you?
What about me? Well, to be honest with you, that Santa Claus one stands out pretty strong. I mean, I think it's the way that Al handles it. And I think it's just funny the idea that that would happen. I don't know, you
Well,
know.
it's also a perfect example of the strategy of Fox because on that night on Family Ties, they had on the same at the same time slot, their Christmas show was Michael J. Fox, Alex Keaton plays a department store Santa, and through his empathy for this poor little girl who's been separated from her father, she brings her father to Christmas dinner at her house, and they're reunited for for the holidays.
Right.
On the same exact night, at the same exact time, Santa plunges to his death in the in the Bundy backyard. And so you couldn't have a bigger contrast of the strategy of, come look at us. If you want to see that, you can see that. But Santa Claus is getting killed on our show, on our
Right.
show. And, see. And then the fallout from that, actually, it was just as classic where Al has to put on dead Santa's
Right.
uniform
Right.
in order to talk to the kids because the kids are worried that Santa died, and Al has to reassure them that
Oh.
Santa's alive. And that just puts our main character in just to a wonderful position, which I think really paid off. So
Well, I liked because you incorporated the neighborhood too, like the idea of, that woman sleeping with somebody, so you may have a new dad, all that
right,
stuff.
right. And your mother doesn't make your mother doesn't make pies for us when she cooks. So she's supposed to give you a pony for Christmas, and if the pony isn't there, it's because your mom scared him away. And so
Right. I mean, that
it
is
never stops. It never
hysterical.
stops. And here he is trying to calm these kids down, and he just, he
Oh,
again goes crazy. So
it's freaking classic. So what do you think it was that about Married with Children that, in essence, America kind of ultimately came around and really loved Married with Children? What do you think it was like, in a nutshell about the family?
I think that a lot of people, and we got letters about this, so it's not. I'm not just completely speculating. A lot of people saw themselves in these characters, and they didn't see themselves represented on other shows, and they said, "God,
Mhm.
that's what even if it was that my uncle is just like that, or and this happened to me," and I think that they saw a man who was struggling with the everyday, fighting City Hall, in the false charges on the phone bill, trouble with your boss, all these things that just simmer and burn in people. And he was a hero, because he stood up to all these things. Now, what made it even more likable, because if he just stands up and it's a scorched earth kind of thing, that's one thing. But he still stepped in duty.
Yeah.
He would fight and he would go down again. He would lose the fight, but then he'd come back up and say, what else do you got?
Right.
So part of this, the empathy, I think, for him wasn't just that he was willing to fight, was that he would fight and lose and come back again. And
Mhm.
I think that's why people like him. And I do think they got tired of I mean, these other shows are uplifting and I watched them too, and they got tired of the idea that you can solve your problems in 22 minutes.
Mhm.
you know, by the end of the show, because I think they're sitting there and they're saying, we've got some problems with Johnny at school or with, you know,
Mhm.
Mary or whatever, and we can't always solve them in
Right.
22 minutes. And this is a very realistic, you know, portrayal of it. And then, but then very cleverly, still with all the problems that they have, you know, they'll fight each other, but
Mhm.
damn it, if someone tries to fight you, then they'll all come together as a family and you know, and defend themselves. And I think people like that too. Um,
Mhm. I think you hit it on the head there. I think that leading to also that I as off the wall and as things could get, and that you never got the sense that, hey, these family members don't love each other. They still loved each other,
right, right,
you
right.
know?
And we would do the very thing that you're pointing out. We would do specific episodes to absolutely prove that. For example, there's an episode where Al and Katie have a fight at the beginning of the show, and he goes off and it's unresolved. And he goes over to a friend's house, and there's a woman, she's a stewardess, and she's coming on to him, and he could clearly have sex with her. I mean,
Mhm.
it's obvious in the situation. Nobody would catch him, nobody, you know, and he resists it and he resists it. She comes on, she comes on. He leaves. She's got long blonde hair. He leaves, he goes home, he knocks on the door, or he walks in the door. Peggy says hello. And before they even apologize, he pulls out a blonde wig because this other woman was wearing a blonde wig, puts it on Katie, picks her up over his shoulder and takes her upstairs to have sex with her. And that's how they resolved it. And it just, it was so perfect. The audience just went wild.
Oh,
They did
yeah.
words. They knew that he was never going to leave her, you know, and
Mhm.
we did a show with Vanna White where she's an ex-girlfriend, and this is along the theme of that you're talking about.
Yeah.
She's an ex-girlfriend. She comes back and she's got hundreds of thousands of dollars. She's married rich, and she wants to reclaim Al, and she's going to pay the family like $500,000 or something like that to take Al away. And they negotiate and they make the deal. And then at the last minute, Peggy's leaving. She's packed and she's got the stuff, and she just can't go through with it, and neither can Al. And they, you know, they're back in bed and they're back as a family. And you know, we would be very careful to show that no matter what, as edgy as they were, as rough as the language was, as
Mhm.
intolerant as they were of each other, that you
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
get on other shows, that in the end, they, you know, they were as strong a unit as you could be.
I love those. Those are great examples. What are some of your most memorable like memories of times offset, you know, when the cameras weren't rolling, that either you saw with the cast or, you know, with Leavitt or Moye? Any moments that kind of stand out for you?
There's a moment, there was um, a joke that never got in the script. Um, and it was, I think it was in the pilot. And the joke was, Al was talking to Steve, and the joke was, you know, it's this PMS thing that women have. You know, I'm no doctor, but I think that PMS stands for pummel men's scrotums. Okay. So, okay. So as open as Fox was to not censoring us, that was beyond the pale for them. They said, you cannot have this line, you know, we're being very open about all these other things, but you can't have this line. So Michael and Ron resisted it, and but that was it. They couldn't win that fight. So later on the stage, like a week or so later, the crew, and this also shows how the crew was so united in feeling that we were a family.
Wow.
To celebrate somebody's birthday, they had a scrotum made into a pinata made like a scrotum, and they hung it from the rafters, and people took their turns at pummeling it. So this was the crew saying, you know, we're with you guys. You know, we we are with you guys, and it was it was off stage, but it was great. Another off
Oh,
stage, very, very similar. Al had was in a fight with a famous football player. I forget his name. And they were fighting at the school over a trophy that Al had won, and the other guy claimed it. Anyway, there was a moment in which they pulled out their wallets to show each other who they were married to. And Al was going to show Peggy and this guy. Oh, I think it was Bubba Smith.
wow. Big
And,
guy.
so and the prop guys, unbeknownst to the two actors, stuffed pictures of oversized models into the wallets, so that when they put them up in each other's face, all of a sudden, I mean, it ruined the take, but it was hysterical, and it just showed the spirit of the show. That everybody, and at the same time, the prop work was meticulous. Everybody was a really, really hard worker, but they knew that they could blow off some steam and do stuff like that. Those are a couple examples.
Oh, those are great. And obviously that filters down from Leavitt and Moye, I'm sure, with that feeling of that.
Absolutely. As long as you get your job done, they'll, you really can. And the other thing is that if it's such a collaborative situation when we're rehearsing the show on the stage, if someone has a suggestion for a joke, I mean, there's some producers who think only their jokes will fly. And if it's a prop person, if it's the wardrobe person, if it's the camera person, Ron and Michael will take the joke and incorporate it into it. And then that way everyone feels that they're part of something. And so, I mean, it was a huge family feeling on the set that Leavitt and Moye engendered.
Oh, I love hearing that. Another term that you mentioned in the book is corpsing. And that is for the audience out there, that is like losing it on stage. You just, crack up. What did that happen very often?
It did, but it's not like, I mean, when you watch Saturday Night Live, they crack up during a skit. But they like to, they incorporate that into it, and it sort of lets it breaks the fourth wall and it lets the audience in on the fun, and everyone thinks it. In a drama or a comedy, you can't do that. You can't break up, or it'll ruin the moment. So the very one that you're talking about, and the term comes about because corpsing, because when you're playing a corpse as an actor or an actress, that's the worst time that you could be laughing.
That would be.
Yeah. So the time that I remember the most specifically was in the Santa show, where all the cast and the neighbors, they're facing the television and they're watching this Santa drop in on a parachute from a skydiving, and all of a sudden you hear the rustling behind them, and then the fake Santa drops, and they turn around, they realize in a second that Santa is dead in their backyard. Well, Ed and David Garrison couldn't stop laughing every time that happened. And so you have to keep the take going in order for it to be realistic. So we had to stop and do it again, and stop and do it again. And they just were absolutely busted up. They both referred to it separately in separate interviews, and I do remember that. So, I mean, that'll happen. They're pretty disciplined otherwise, and sometimes they'll just hold it until the camera stops, and then they'll stop laughing. But that was a very notable time.
Oh my God! Now, you had mentioned earlier about Barry Diller. Did he come visit the set at points, or did he let it go after that?
Not a lot, particularly in the very beginning, when they're establishing the show from the very beginning. The network gets very involved, but he's very high up at the network. And I want to say, he was a thorn in our side a couple of times, the PMS joke and the cast ending. But if it weren't for, I mean, he had this vision that the network had to be very different, and he embraced the idea of being different. And if it weren't for sort of his vision of doing that, he had a phrase, I believe it was, and I use it in the book, he had to, in order to steal viewers from ABC, CBS, and NBC, you had to pick them up by their shirt collar and drag them over. So
Yes.
and he had that corporate philosophy, and he was a very tough guy. And but he had he was so far kind of up the ladder that he didn't show up much. There was a fellow by the name of Garth Ancier, who was a 28-year-old wunderkind executive at NBC. And when Diller hired him to work at Fox, his folks at NBC said, "You're crazy. You're going over to this network. It could end tomorrow, and you have such a great career here." And he said, I'll never get this opportunity again to kind of work in this new field. I mean, it's old field, but with new ideas. And he came over, and he was the guy who, I mean, you asked about if Diller was there. He was Diller's kind of eyes and ears, but he was his own man. And he would come over to the set, and we're off on our own for 2 or 3 days. Then the network comes over, and we have what's called the network run through, and then they go away, and then they come back on the show. So they're there and they're not there. The deal that Fox made was that they wouldn't have such a strong presence as the typical networks do. But we were fortunate to have Garth as our network guy, because he had so much empathy for what we were doing, and he knew that we were the key to them being a success. So he wasn't, in any show that I've almost ever been on, there's this whole, it's we're the creatives and they're the suits,
Right.
and the suits are the up to, and this and that and the other thing. And that's, there is truth to that. Any stereotype's got to have some truth. But Garth defied all of that. He understood that we had to have a certain amount of freedom. And then when we a couple of times when we sort of crossed it, he would let Ron and Michael know, okay, this is a situation where you've got to give in a little bit. And so he was very good at keeping that going. So when he was there for the first couple of years, he really kept the ship afloat.
Very cool. Very cool. I think something else that I read that I was so surprised about is that Sam Kinison was actually the network's choice for Al Bundy. That blew me away.
This is how that came down. When creatives have an idea for a show, they have what they call an elevator pitch. What if Sam Kinison and Roseanne Barr got married and had kids? Just sort of to just make you sort of understand kind of what the arena was. Ron and Michael, that was their elevator pitch. They said to the executives at the studio, not the network, at the studio. And the studio, and they absolutely did not want to hire Roseanne and Sam because they didn't want to work with established comics because they had their own ways, and it was just going to be they envisioned a nightmare. So the studio went and they actually made offers to Sam Kinison and Roseanne Barr, and Sam was very hot at the time off of some movie, and Roseanne had won some comedy festival. I mean, they weren't who they ultimately were, but they were big names,
right,
that Fox would like, and Sam and Roseanne turned them down. And when they did, that put a kind of a pall over the whole casting process, because anyone that we came up with had to be compared with, well, are they as good as Sam Kinison and Roseanne Barr?
Wow.
Would be. So Sam Kinison and Roseanne Barr were, for anyone who's seen the whole series, were actually considered to be Al and Peggy. And fortunately, I think history has shown they turned him down. So,
well, very fortunate. And Sam, of course, ends up being on I believe it was a 2-part episode. Do you recall when he was there and in that whole experience?
Yeah. Actually, I wasn't there. I was there for about 7 or 8 of the 11 years, and that was a year I wasn't there. But I heard plenty of stories, and I mean, it turned out, working backwards, it turned out amazing. It's just a wonderful, wonderful, groundbreaking episode. where they parody It's a Wonderful Life, and everyone ended up loving Sam. But he would do things like he would show up late for rehearsal. He would be in the wings and he'd moon the cast. I mean, it was Sam being Sam, which
Yeah.
in a way showed people what the nightmare that the show would have been if
Oh,
Sam had
big
been there
time.
all along. But then he made these big apologies. He took them all out to dinner at Spago. One day for something he did, he showed up late. The next day he had a lunch catered by one of the top restaurants in town for the cast, and it was served by strippers. So Sam, in his own way, while still being Sam, pissed people off and ingratiated them at the same time.
Oh yeah, yeah. Going back to Bud and Kelly, David Faustino and Christina Applegate, but what do you think it was that the audience became, really loved these characters? I mean, not that they didn't love Al and Peggy, but
Right, right.
I'm talking about it just they took on a whole nother level with those two. Why do you think that was?
I think that I think they were so deeply committed to their parts. They just played them. I mean, Christina in particular, I mean, David too, but Christina had this thing where, where she was ostensibly stupid and she would do malaprops and the defense, the defense breasts, or she'll say, and she'll mix things up and so on and so forth. But she did it in a way as if she were the smartest person in the room.
Right. Yeah,
And
true.
so, and sometimes it did have logic, like she would say, and some of it's the writing, but a lot of it is how she played it. Like, I'm afraid Dad's going to make a testicle of himself. And then she'll get corrected and say, you mean a spectacle of himself? No. He always makes a spectacle of himself. He's going to make a testicle of himself. So she had such deep commitment to her part, and she just played it. And then even though we played her as loose, she still drew lines, and you never felt. I mean, she knew when to stand up for herself, and I don't know. She just played it with just great authority and spunk.
Mhm.
And the other thing that happened with both of them is that we just discovered as the series kept going that they were more important to the formula than when we had started, particularly after Garrison left the ensemble.
Yeah, exactly.
We pushed them out more, and they studied their parts, and I don't know, they just pulled it off. I mean, David with his Grandmaster B, his rapper thing. I mean, he got interested in the music business, in the rapping scene, and he would hang out with rappers, and big rappers like will.i.am, and he would bring them to the set and everything, and then we incorporated that into his act, and
Wow.
it was him as the aspiring rapper that he brought this to his part, and people loved him for it. And of course, being married, he was going to still fall on his face. He still wasn't going to get girls, or if he did get girls, he'd end up losing them. But he had both of them had such deep commitment to their parts. I think that's why the audience loved them.
Interesting. That is a really interesting analysis. I hadn't thought about it on that level. The other one too, season 5 in the book really felt like kind of like a tense turning point to me in the show.
Yeah.
Why was that? What was it?
Okay, well, Steve left in season 4, and in season 5, Steve kind of grounded Al. The idea in comedies and in dramas too is that you learn what one character is by his relationship to another character, and Al's anger about the system, about money, about capitalism, about yuppies, and so on and so forth, was very focused in Steve, because it was this yuppie banker, and he was a newlywed, and he was everything that Al wasn't. And it was a source of stories, and it was a source. It contained the show. Al could be mad at Steve. He could influence Steve. Steve, he could turn Steve against Marcy. I mean, so when David Garrison decided to leave the show, and I want to really make it very clear, there was no tension. David wanted to go back to Broadway, to New York, to his theater acting career, and he went back and he did great. And he went back with Ron and Michael's blessing. But he left this big hole, which is, where does Al find where's his anger? Where does it get taken out? What's the direction of the stories? And what happened from that point on, for better or worse, and sometimes better and sometimes worse, is that he exploded against the world. So he had to find, and not that he wasn't doing this to some extent, but he had to find targets. Somebody comes into the shoe store, the Department of Water and Power, the beer tax. He had to find all these sort of outside sources. So the structure of it that had been sort of contained opened up wide, and it was harder. The show became broader, and it sort of became kind of cartoonish. Al falling off the roof and landing on his head, and Martians visiting, and so I think that the fifth season, and no coincidence that when Steve left, it sort of unraveled in that direction. I mean, to answer your question, the other thing that happens, and it probably would have happened to some extent on our show anyway, on any series that lasts 4, 5, 6, 7 seasons, is that you run out of sort of real premise-driven stories to tell. You've told so many stories, so many, the kid in the homework, the neighbor next door, and so on and so forth, that you start looking for, bigger, broader stories. And Michael Moye, I quote him, he says, at that point, we sort of let the audience drive. So whatever was kind of thrilling to the audience, we pushed out, and maybe you could argue that we pushed it too far, but I think the fifth season is the demarcation of that, and that's when the series took on more of a cartoonish and less of a gritty reality.
Yeah. The other thing that you reference is Ed O'Neill and Amanda Bearse, and that there definitely were tensions. What I found interesting about it was it wasn't like, hey, this was from the get-go. It felt like something that started as actually quite a good relationship and went the complete other way. What happened?
I'll tell you what happened, and they're both very forthright about this. In talking to me. One of the things that happened was, as sometimes actors aspire to be directors, they can be very good directors because they're there and they know all the techniques. So Amanda aspired to be a director, and she became one, and she was contractually given 3 or 4 episodes to do one season, and she did well, and she got to do more, and then she got to do more, and she got to do more. And so instead of her relationship as being the fifth character in an ensemble with Ed, she was telling him what to do, as she had to. That was her role. And they got into it became a personality thing of, you're telling me what to do, and they got into some issues that we had to control. I mean, it was nothing that jeopardized the total falling apart of the series, but it was ironic because we have this family that's kind of out of control, that is fictional, and then our real family behind the camera had problems. I don't want to emphasize it too much. It's not like a tabloid thing.
I got it. I'm not looking for that.
And I think anyone who's familiar kind of with the story of Married with Children, that's read about in the trades and so on, knows about it. And I felt I would have been remiss in not talking about it.
Agreed.
But that was really kind of the genesis of it, was about control, and Ed sort of had so much control over the set kind of before she became a director. And then when she became a director, by necessity, she had to have control because
you're the director.
She's the director. So that's where things kind of went.
I understand. I got you. Very cool. I appreciate you putting it out there, because I think it is important. Were David Faustino, by the way, and Christina Applegate, were they at all like I know that you said, yeah, we drew on like the rap and with Christina, but were they at all like their characters at the time when this show
I,
started shooting, or were
I
they
think
different?
not. I think yeah, because David was very did very well with the girls and in real life, and
Yeah.
we had him very frustrated, and Christina was selective about she wasn't like sort of play around like we had her character, and she certainly wasn't ditzy or like I said, if anything, she had a smart underbelly that belied sort of the craziness. So I would say they were acting. So
Gotcha. Okay,
that's
I love
that's
that.
a good
The,
question.
the
Yeah.
other thing that was very interesting in the book is how the woman her name's Rakolta.
Terry
Uh
Rakolta.
yeah, how she I mean, it's such an incredible story because it's the old bad publicity, good publicity, it's all publicity. And could
Yeah.
you embellish a little bit on that story?
Sure. Around the third season, this woman from Michigan named Terry Rakolta saw an episode she was watching with her kids, and she didn't like it. And it was bawdy. It was a show and it was sort of a body show where Al goes to a bra shop with Steve to buy a bra for Katie because her bra was discontinued, and this was the only place that had it. So in the bra shop, everyone's walking around half naked. I mean, TV half naked.
No,
I
I
mean,
get it. I get it. Yeah.
anyway, so she complained to the studio. The studio didn't really have a way of sort of handling her complaints. She ended up talking to someone on the show, actually one of the people who wrote the episodes, and she didn't get any satisfaction out of her complaints. She
But she
felt
got the call. Wait, the way I read this is she called in, but as you said, there was no department. So the call just
like,
got forwarded right to the person that wrote it.
yes,
I
yes,
mean,
and
that
this is
doesn't happen.
and that the whole thing could potentially have been avoided had that not have happened. So she ends up talking directly to the sponsors, to Colgate, so huge sponsors, Colgate, Palmolive, Coca-Cola,
Coca-Cola, I think was
yeah, and she gets them to say that they will boycott the show unless they do something about it, and she becomes a media darling. She's on the front page of the New York Times, Washington Post. She's on Nightline. She's on the morning shows. The story just blows up. Well, what happens is, and it often happens like this, is that the attendant publicity from it drove all these people, these new viewers, to the show, and the show took off. And but there had to been something at the show that they liked because the viewers stayed with it. And then all of a sudden, these advertisers were begging to get back in, and we had new advertisers, and we had a higher rate of return. So the whole thing backfired on her. And I will say she was very gracious in letting me interview her. And her whole point, one of her bigger points did happen, which was to put the show on at a later time period.
by half an hour.
Yeah, a half an hour. And they did do that. And then she had the feeling that if they had done that to begin with, the whole boycott could have been avoided. But if the boycott had been avoided, we might have not have been the hit show that we were. So yeah, she was like a one-man band. Yeah. So
Yeah, I got to tell you, one of the funniest parts of that whole story to me was that you have people like Procter and Gamble, Coca-Cola, and they're like, "We're pulling, we're not going to be part of
right.
that." And then the show takes off. They come back to the table and they're like, "You know what? Actually, we're
Yeah.
back. It's all been
Yeah,
resolved." And
we'll pay even more. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, we're happy to have you back, but it's a lot
Yeah.
more money now." It's
Yeah.
because of what happened.
No, that was an irony. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I love moments like that when that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah. No, you can't write that. That
No,
actually happened.
you can't. I mean, and like I said, she got what she wanted. You guys got what you
Yeah.
wanted. It
Yeah.
actually worked out really well,
Yeah.
you know, all in all. So the other side, I thought this was interesting. Over 20 Playboy playmates were actually on Married with Children. I mean,
They
was
were
that
either
ever an
extras or
issue?
they were either extras or they had bit parts or they were in scenes or they were at the strip club or they were yeah, Ron and Michael were very, happy to have them around. And yeah, they were part of the scene, and our audience seemed to enjoy it too. So what can
And
I
you
say?
mentioned one story in there, which by the way, off the top of my head, I can't remember, but there was something about one of them showed up and her, I can't remember
Okay,
what she did,
all
but
right. Well, I'll tell the story.
okay,
Um,
thanks.
we heard from the cast that there was a playmate bunny on the set during the week. You know, we're up in the offices, and
Yeah.
the stage is the other, a football field away. And we were told by the actors that this one actress who's a playmate was flashing everybody. She was walking around and just being totally inappropriate.
I mean, unbelievable.
So, and that it was upsetting, you know, the cast, at least the, the women. Anyway, so it was disruptive. So we had to sit down, and Ron and Michael, we brought them into our office, and Ron and Michael very seriously had to say to her, "We love you, Terry, but you know, you've got to cut the flashing out. It's disruptive, and the actors don't like it, and we're getting all these complaints." And they had to act like grown men, you know,
Yeah.
say
Yeah. Right.
because it was a, you know, production problem. I mean,
Right.
you imagine if you're a corporate person at IBM and you have, I mean, it's like an executive telling an employee.
Exactly. They're the heads. Yeah.
And she sort of held her head down, and she seemed kind of sad about the whole thing. And then she's, you know, like the door's right behind her, and she said, okay, I won't flash on the set anymore, but is it okay if I flash you guys?" And she goes like that and flashes us and then exits, like the most comedically timed exit I've ever seen. So that was that. I mean, it's interesting because when you asked me stuff earlier, when you said stuff that wasn't on the
Right.
stage, that's definitely you know, something that happened that was memorable that was not on the stage.
Well, you know what is so ironic about this story is we're not talking about family ties. We're talking about married
Right.
with children. And
Right.
actually something that actually happened in real life was even
Yes.
more wild than what you could write.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just blown away by that. So the other thing is you take over as executive producer of the
Right.
show in season 10.
Right.
Um, what was that like for with I should mention Kim Weiskopf
Right.
too. What was that like? What were at that point when you took over, what were kind of like the most significant changes that you kind of had to deal with during
Well,
your
it was really hard for me, and it was hard for the cast, and it was hard for everyone. I had been there for a while, and I was the logical choice. Ron and Michael both had decided to do other things. Ron had left a year or two before, and Michael had left that last year. And so it was like being a substitute teacher. You know, it was hard for the cast to have a lot of confidence in the material. And even though Michael was around a lot, Michael helped to develop the stories and write the scripts. And it was trying. I mean, we got through the year. I mean, we made one big mistake, which was that we had Katie's family, the Wankers from Wanker County, who were kind of like
sorry.
half-breed, you know, crazy. And they had always been a source of jokes, off-screen jokes, you know, marrying your brother, and I mean, just, you know, sort of these crazy hillbilly kind of characters. Well, we brought them into the setting. We brought them in as characters in the season, and they just weren't as fun. They were much more funny in your imagination than they
Wow.
were in reality, and that was a tough thing. I mean, it was a hard season, um, you know, because Ron and Michael weren't there. B, they keep getting harder, you know, 10th
Sure, sure.
was even harder. And it was hard. I mean, we didn't have, you know, big fights, but I could tell. And also by then the actors get tired of playing the same jokes. And I mean, Ed would say to me, "I don't find this funny," you know, and I would say, "But nothing happened. You didn't get struck by lightning. Your audience is going to find it funny, and you sort of have to keep doing it." And they did, and we got through it. But it was a hard year. It was a hard year
Yeah,
for me.
I could see that. The other
Yeah.
thing, a very interesting little like fun fact is that you said that the director of photography was Meghan Markle's father, and that she actually was there for many of the seasons.
Meghan Markle's father was the director of photography, and he would pick her daughter up from Catholic school and bring her to the set every day. And she
Oh.
kind of grew up around there. I didn't really know her except to, just to see that was Tommy's daughter. And she actually was in a Married with Children. She was actually in an episode as an extra, and she obviously she went on to become an actress and a duchess, but she would hang around the series. And as I did research for this, I didn't interview her, but she speaks fondly of her time around the set and having fun. And her father would make her go over to craft services, make her go away from the set when there was kind of lewd, more risque kind of talk going on. So yeah,
That's a great little like tidbit.
Yeah.
Well, my last question for you, and then we'll close. But I read too at the very end, which I really found interesting, is that if I got this correct, first of all, the show for the viewers, the audience, it went on to be, different versions of it in other countries all over the world.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and I read in there, I think you said that Russia, you actually wrote like, they had the original scripts, but then you guys wrote like a lot more scripts just for Russia.
Yeah, I wrote just a few. Our show had ended, so our staff wasn't there anymore. I was brought in to consult on some, and they were, first of all, they couldn't shoot every single one of ours. There were 40 or 50 of them that they couldn't shoot because, if it was an episode, bad example, of baseball cards or something like that, they didn't have there. They couldn't do the entire episode, so they didn't. But it was so popular that they ran out of them. And when I say we, various freelance writers were brought in to write episodes that they shot. I mean, they're through shooting them, but it was so popular in Russia. And I asked somebody who worked over there on it, and they said, it's a guy against the system, and it's relatable even in that country. It's a man standing up for what he believes, and even if he gets falls on his sword. So that's what made it popular.
Oh, how interesting. You made me think of one other question. The show revolved often around sports with Al,
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, did any of the moments with sports, did they have any basis in somebody else's real life, like moment or anything like that?
Well, Al scored 4 touchdowns in one game. No, I mean, that wasn't it. No, they sports figures, first of all, loved to come on the show. Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, Bubba Smith.
Wow.
Terry Bradshaw was on a couple times. And it was more the sports figures. Al and his friends had glory in their high school day, and a lot of people have glory in their high school days or in their college days, and then the rest of their life they can't so they're trying to, Al and his buddies would try to relive that glory, and we would bring in sports figures sometimes to go up against them, or just to just to kind of represent what that meant in their life. So I can't think of anything specific that triggered that, other than sports was such a big part of the legend of Al Bundy.
It was huge.
Sports people around.
Yeah. Were there any in particular that you were like, okay, that's cool, that so-and-so's here?
I thought Joe Morgan, Johnny Bench, I thought Joe Namath. I thought
Joe was on. Wow.
Yeah, Broadway Joe. Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty darn cool.
Right.
Well, listen, Richard, if you don't mind, why don't you say the title one more time for my audience, so they can tell them where they can find the book.
Married with Children versus the World. And it's coming out on April 23rd, if I may plug. And I hope you enjoy it. I tried to make it funny like the show. And I tried to make it a tribute to the show and its fans. And thank you for having me on. It was great.
Oh my gosh, it's a total pleasure. I enjoyed having you on very much so. And for everybody out there, I read the book myself, and it is very good. If you're a Married with Children fan, I highly suggest you get it. So thanks again, Richard. My pleasure.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
As always, thanks for listening, and please hit the subscription button and the notification bell so that you can be notified when I have a new episode. And also go check out some of my other episodes, like Jerry Mathers, Henry Winkler, Judy Norton, so many. Enjoy.